All right.
There wouldn't be any conception of faithful ministers of the state unless there were a lot of
Scoundrels.
lousy politicians around.
All right. Coming to you for part 2 on this day, which is still Monday, the 29th of April. Listening to this super heavy hitting Alan Watts clip, and man, it's just so good. I just love the Tao. Just, I experientially, in terms of spirituality, the Tao is the thing that has touched me with like any sense of familiarity or explanation about human experience. I have 2 points I want to make here. One that just arose as a tangent, and then the other one about an experience I had with a lawnmower, which is what originally made me want to start making this clip. But the tangent is that, I grew up Christian, and for a long period of time, when you grow up in a church, I think, you just show up because your parents bring you. You don't have autonomy in that sense. But in my teenage years, I was kind of a bit more interested in what everything was all about as I reached the age of, I guess, the loss of innocence, puberty or something. And I do remember, might have already even told this story. I only have so many stories, but in going to Panama City with my youth group when I was maybe 14 or 15, and I could confirm my exact age because I remember the Coldplay album X and Y had just come out, and I was pretty into it, start to finish. I thought it was a great album. Maybe not as good as like A Rush of Blood to the Head or Parachutes, but for what it was, it checked all the boxes. It gave me the goosebumps, which is like what I always look for in music. Some band to give me that feeling of like visceral ecstasy. So I'll have to consult with Google later, see what year that was. But anyway, at this point in my life, I was old enough to decide that I was going to try to open myself up to the experience of God while I was in Panama City. And, I kind of thought, not really giving the whole thing an ultimatum so much as just being like, okay, you know what? I've never really tried to consciously open myself up to these ideas and these beliefs. So I just remember having that thought and being like, okay, concerted effort, try to be as unbiased as possible. And, it was a fun time. It was a good trip. The most standout memories are that I remember walking to a gas station by myself to buy a Lipton iced tea with lemon, which at the time I thought was the most delicious thing I'd ever had. And I was listening to Coldplay while doing it. I do remember that. I also remember the testimonials, which I guess that'll be the next thing I talk about. But then I believe this was the same trip, my friend Josh and I, we swam out to a little sandbar, and this was all at the urging of Josh. I'm not a huge fan of water, and I certainly don't want to swim out to the ocean, but he wanted to do it, so we did it. And we got to this little sandbar, and once we did, what are you going to do? You basically just turn around and go back. And so while swimming out from the sandbar, we had to be in some pretty deep water in between the main shoreline and where we just had been. And while in like the middle of the deep section, a shark went by us, and I was just like, oh my God, just, blood becomes ice. And, it's interesting to have the fight or flight response, especially when your choice is flight, when you cannot run at all or escape in any way. You see this deft creature moving through the water effortlessly, a killing machine with like no consciousness or feelings of sympathy for the pain of others. And, you know, the only thing, I remember it being significant because like the only option we had, you know, because if you flee, you want to flee in the opposite direction of what you're running from. And so the instinct to flee would have just meant that we swam back behind us into the deeper water, because it was getting shallower all the time in front of us as we got closer to the shore. And so that was terrifying. You know, I wonder, you know, perhaps a differently coded human being would consider that a miracle. Maybe that would have been their testimonial, funny enough, that, you know, they could have died in this. The shark could have killed them. I don't even know what kind of shark it was. It might have been one that's generally harmless, which I know is possible. But in any case, I remember listening to the testimonials as well, which, you know, I thought, if anything, was going to light my fire for this whole thing. It would be listening to these people describe, I don't know, maybe I'm just generally not very empathetic, but listening to all these people tell their stories about how they came to God. I mean, I want to say it was nauseating, but not in like the actual physical revulsion, just like cringy, you know, just, I don't know, it's supposed to be like a judgment-free zone, which is maybe what people get off on because they feel like they can say all this stuff and they're just forgiven, because like the whole thought of Christianity is, you know, forgiveness for sins, which is such a terrible thesis statement for any philosophy, because it's just like interwoven in the fact that, well, not the fact, but the premise that sin is something like ever present and like not something that is like you can never overcome or avoid it. So the best you can do is be a sinner and ask for forgiveness. It's really twisted, and I've never wholeheartedly like believed that the world operates like that in any way. I've got some people coming up, so we'll get back to this in a moment. A little bit of ambience, AT ambience. Good morning. Oh, you can go on through.
Thanks.
Yeah, have a good one. So, you know, yeah, cringy at best. I don't remember anyone's specific testimony. As I say that, I do recall one. One girl I remember had like sort of an eating disorder, and she mentioned that very briefly about like the struggles and, you know, the way that God was helping or whatever. I don't know. I mean, to me, it just seems like a very immature philosophy that's just based on the concept of good and evil is just so, it's just, well, it seems pedestrian to me, because it's like when you become an adult, you don't need to be afraid of monsters anymore. So likewise, when you become an adult, I think the idea of absolute wrong and right, I think, you know, the formation of the frontal cortex and reasonability and logical thinking, the whole point of that is to realize, I think, the gray in life. I think the ideas of good and evil are sort of necessary for developing minds, which is maybe why inculcation of children is like the most, it would probably be the easiest, because absolute good and evil makes sense when you look around the world, you know. But yeah, I mean, that's where the Tao comes in, because, you know, I think it might have even actually been on Dixon Jane's. I think it was, in fact, and if that's true, then I really need to thank the Scarborough dude again for just all the times he has introduced me to something that became a big part of my life, you know. I don't know in what part I owe him for my time in Japan, inspiring me to go, and not inspiring me, but encouraging me to go. And, you know, it's funny because I still have a password that is some variation of the sentiment that I want to go to Japan, that I made when I was in college, because that was one of my goals in college, was to study abroad. It wasn't like a super explicit goal. I didn't like obsess over it or anything, but when the opportunity did come, I jumped on it. It was awesome. You can listen to, I think I made 30 podcasts in Japan, under the show title Molt. Those are somewhere on Internet Archive. If you search for Molt and Kenneth Pereira, you should be able to find them. The series did continue when I came back from Japan, but my life sort of evened out, and I didn't really feel like there was much I had to say at that point. But that actually reminds me of another thing, which is that I've had the idea now since, I think I've had it a couple times while I've been out here, but I think when I get back after the Appalachian Trail, I might just continue to make like one clip a day of just my life, anything that's going on, anything I'm thinking about at any point of the day. Certainly, at the very least, a concluding clip that kind of summarizes everything I did that day. I don't know, I think it would be cool. Sort of like, it's kind of, back to the Scarborough dude, it's kind of what I wish Dixon Janes was. I mean, I can't lie to you. If you were creating a podcast every single day, I would be overjoyed. And I know some people probably would feel, overwhelmed by it. I don't know why they would. I mean, just because something is created at such a frequency doesn't mean it has to be consumed like that. But I guess in this day of like binge watching and, media and content on demand, people, if you have too much of it, there's a revulsion, kind of like a soda with extra sugar, it's too sweet. But in any case, I think that would be a cool thing to do, especially as I transition from this experience back to my normal life and everything that changes and falls into place at that time. So, back to Taoism and listening to this Alan Watts clip. I mean, it's just like, the thing about it, and it's hard to describe, because the whole thing about it is that if you try to describe it, you're going to miss elements of it. It's sort of like, I don't know. I mean, Alan Watts, the thing I love about him is just that he describes everything with metaphors. And I think that's also why I like Harmontown, the podcast, because to me, thinking about everything as like a simile or a metaphor is kind of how I digest life. I see, it's like that quote that I've quoted before. I think it's like Musashi or something like that. But when you understand the way broadly you see it's manifest in all things, you see its manifestation in all things. And so, like, I don't know, there's just like certain recurring patterns, like fractals basically, everywhere in nature, and people are part of nature. And like, that kind of goes back to the Tao, where like, I don't know, consciousness of it disturbs it, but like ignorance to it, but surrender to it at the same time is like the way you can experience it. And it's so different, it's so alien from Western religions, where like it's so much more hierarchical in like Abrahamic religions. Like, there's like it's like a king structure basically. I mean, they call Jesus the king, right? Jesus and Elvis. But like the even playing field the Tao produces for those who are aware of it, I guess, but also don't fight against it. The one of the metaphors I really like that Alan Watts said was that, like, it's as if human beings, all of this basically arises from consciousness, trying to explain consciousness and like suffering and stuff like that. But not just suffering, also the opposite of suffering, which is like joy, and like why those two necessitate each other and fall together. And like, I don't know, the reading the Tao Te Ching itself, it's basically 80 some odd verses that are just like metaphors for understanding everything in the world, the 10,000 things, as it says. And I really dig on that. But anyway, Alan Watts was saying, like, it's as if we are floating in a stream, right? And the people who float along effortlessly and in their own path create something that is like expert, so to speak. Like, I don't know, the whole thing was a metaphor for life. And so people who are like really good at something are like not resisting the flow in that part of their life. They're going with it completely, and it becomes so effortless, and that's where like mastery arises from. It's because effortless necessitates mastery. It's like they're technically opposites, but they're opposites on different poles of the same line. And so like you can kind of ping pong back and forth between being like effortlessly masterful. So it's like you're not putting any effort into it at all, but you're doing a perfect job. Like different things, different little tricks like that to think about spirituality and life and, again, consciousness. And I think Christianity just really falls short of that kind of profound simplicity, which again, those are like antonyms. Profound simplicity. I mean, I guess those aren't technically antonyms, but it's complex simplicity. Somehow single-handedly describing everything, while also in the same breath describing nothing. And understanding of it is when you are perfectly walking the line of those two distinctions, where it's like you're not aware of the positive or the negative, you're just walking that line. And since my neck still hurts, it's funny because Alan Watts is also very fond of saying, like, try to bite your own teeth. Like, try to see your own eyes. Try to hear your own ears. It's like when these things are working properly, there's no effort at all. They just work. You're not even aware of them working. You take them for granted. So absolutely. And yeah, you know, my neck hurts right now. So I'm aware that I have a neck, unfortunately, which dips me off of that like flow-like ability to be physically fit. But I have faith that my neck will be good again in probably about 2 days. So what can you do? No pain, no rain, no Maine, as they say. So I'm out here in pain, and I'm getting closer to Maine. So that's pretty sweet. Pretty much the best situation you can hope for. It's the ability to move forward despite all the little niggles, as British people say. Still feel weird saying that word because it just doesn't sound right from an American's tongue. Too many G's in N's, I think. Anyway, though, yeah, I just wanted to say a little something about Taoism, and there's a really good YouTube video of the audiobook. It's about 4 hours long. I think it's 2 hours long. And it's good. The narrator is really talented and seems to really care about the text. I don't know if it's the author or not. The narrator cares so much, it seems from his tone, that I feel like he had to have written the book. Either that or he's just a masterful narrator. And so I recommend anyone listening to that, particularly if you're a person who has a weird guilt complex about the notions of things that are quote-unquote good and bad. You know, you're looking at the world too simply. You're fighting against the flow. You have to kind of take a moment to realize that there's nothing in life, I think, objectively speaking, that is good or bad. I mean, this is why I don't like politics, because obviously in the world of humans, there are things that are good and bad. But if you want to tap into that oneness that everyone's always talking about, and that sense of completion and absolution, I guess, I think you got to think about how big everything is, even outside of humanity. Or at least I enjoy doing that when I have the presence of mind to do so. So I think I'll go back to the clip now. Nature may be calling again. Had a really weird dinner last night. Tuna, mashed potatoes, and a Mountain House breakfast meal. Very strange combo. So anyway, I guess that's it for now. And I don't know. Talk to you again later, I suppose. Bye.
No one would talk about filial piety unless there were wayward sons.